This is the One Shot Growth Podcast. No fluff, real business. Hosted by Daniel Radabaugh and Derek Boyd, where business, mindset, and real life collide through real conversations, real experiences, and figuring it out together. If you're building, learning, and figuring it out too, you're in the right place.
Welcome to the show, Kailey. I'm glad to have you here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I know we talked last week quite a bit about what you do and, your process. I want to jump right in today. One of the big things that we talked about was kind of that valley between innovation and execution in the energy sector.
Right. So what we talk about when we say that is the programming required for deep technology development. If we think through the let's say industry arc of energy technology, we're talking about the industrial space, right? So deep tech is industrial technology. And oftentimes the use case, the problem that's being solved, it seems so obvious. And quite frankly, it's usually very large. We're talking about billion-dollar problems, not million-dollar problems. And so we get PhDs and scientists and technologists to start working in labs and universities across the globe on these really big problems. But oftentimes what it will end up happening is the design solutions were designed in the lab and we're never incorporating an engagement with the actual user of the technology. And then because the industry arc moves so big and so over so much capital that's being deployed in the sector, you'll find that once that technology reaches a certain level of maturity, it's been proven and tested in the lab. It's only after it's been proven and tested in the lab that customer engagement, the let's say customer discovery, business development side of the commercialization go-to-market strategy gets engaged. And then what happens there? You don't move fast enough within that go-to-market strategy. Capitalization takes time in terms of the financial architecture behind a deal. And then, especially if it's a mature space where commoditization is already taking place, what then will likely happen is a cost plus pricing strategy will be deployed. And from that point onward, it's a race to the bottom. And so that's when that valley of death syndrome comes on really hard and really fast in industrial technology, because it's so capital rich in the upfront phase of development. You have to invest, millions of dollars in designing the hardware, testing it, and validating it within a lab. And in terms of having that speed to recoup that return on investment, if there's not a long-term discipline within the cap table, within the investor side of the, let's say, enterprise, then you'll run into that reactionary cycle that comes on rather quickly. And it's, like I said, a race to the bottom, cost plus pricing all over. And so the technology that's taken over a decade to mature in a lab and bring out to the industry sector as a meaningful solution will then oftentimes have its value completely stripped and cannibalized right on contact with the market.
Yeah, I think speaking to that, we see this a lot in the industry, like you described. It's kind of mind-blowing to look at things from just a product first to build and develop, and then come back out to try to tailor to the people side and the personnel that are involved in actually making things happen. I think the process flow could be reworked a little to maybe focus on the people first, and we'll talk more about how you go about helping teams do that. But I think that's a big benefit that comes out of just taking a bird's eye view of the actual whole process and kind of rebuilding the structure of what it looks like to make it more efficient.
So I want to zero in on something you said there regarding putting people first. If we step back for a moment on just that word choice, right? especially depending on whatever news cycle or moment we're in pop culture, that can sound really soft. People can roll their eyes at that. Okay, but I would love to talk about the financial architecture and engineering that putting people first really results in. So when we think about how technology gets deployed and applied in industrial sectors, it's like any other industry. It's people that make contact with the technology, that deploy it in the field, that integrate it into systems, and that then make it profitable. And if we don't design solutions around how this actual touch point takes place, around the concept of a very specific job to be done in that industrial space, we end up failing investors and stakeholders at every level in the enterprise and in the industry arc. Um, and the big miss on that is you have the opportunity to design solutions around how technology will be utilized in the field, and you then pick up actual like a what ends up having that compounding effect, right? So if I save you a trip in this one workflow, guess what? That trickles onward to the next touch point and the next touch point after that. And over time, that ends up compounding and compounding out to the tune of, billions of dollars of savings, or, you know, countless hours saved, in an industrial work process. And many of us are really aware how those minutes and hours make a huge impact on the bottom line when we're dealing with billion or $1 million projects.
So let me ask you this. So you come from a Baker Hughes background. You've worked with some very large companies. Taking what you've learned there, and now you've opened your own business. You're solely focusing on this mission. But what is it that you're seeing from that corporate life that is the main driver in where you're at today and why you decided to start this?
I have to comment that my decision to leave the company and start my own business was really a personal decision that was based on looking at the moment that we're in right now, historically speaking, and realizing that I could do more and I could be more if I was out on my own independent. And so that's really more personal about me and my capacity. Within the company itself, I still, say Baker Hughes is a really well built company, and it is structured in a way that it will continue to deliver value to its shareholders and to the stakeholders writ large in the industry for decades to come. And I like the portfolio of Baker Hughes so much because it is really intentionally addressing all sectors within energy. So oil and gas, all the way through new technologies for renewables and clean technologies. And then in the last year, they made their big acquisition into the data center development space as well. So in regards to that, they're really they made this claim early on that they were a full stream company. That's not necessarily part of their tagline anymore, but it still holds true within their portfolio. That being said, where I was working within the company did not give me the opportunity to work in the financial architecture of a systems approach to energy technology. And at this point in time in my career, with the experience that I've had, I'm positioned with the expertise and the abilities to do that. So that's what I'm working on right now within Acorders.
Well, I think you're very similar to Derek and I's story, right? We both have worked in larger companies. We both come from that corporate side. And what we saw and what we were able to do within those companies was great. We were able to change culture. We were able to work through that. But what we realized is a much bigger picture. We can change that for multiple companies. And this is something that everybody needs.
I'm really glad that you guys are doing this, and I'll come back to the moment that we're in, right? I had the opportunity to sit down with a good friend over the weekend. We were talking about career journeys and our personal stories, and it dawned on me that if I were to go all the way back to the beginning of my career and map out for you what I was doing as a lieutenant in the US Army in 2008 was preparing me for this exact moment that we're in right now with what's happening in this restructuring of the labor force with AI. I also happen to have been very blessed to have really great mentors and advisors that were thought leaders in the future of workspace. For over a decade, they were grooming me and they were preparing me for this moment that we're in. So Daniel, one, I want to comment that when I met you and we sat down and we were talking at the Offshore Technology Conference, I recognized somewhat of a kindred spirit, a journeyer, that is moved in and out of these spaces and is prepared for this moment that we're in right now. Derek, I'm just meeting you, but my presumption is that you guys are partners for a very similar reason. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really cool because I think it's important for all of us in this decision to make the jump. Being driven and passionate about what you love to do is so much more fulfilling, I think, to be able to wake up every day and actually dive into what you really have grown to love. And you're right. I mean, this process has been a journey from day one of just so many different areas of learning and development and growth. But what I'm excited about now is it does seem like we're at a point in time where there's actually more open-mindedness to looking at things from a different perspective now. Whereas maybe 10 years ago when we were still passionate about these topics, but it just might not have been the right time. And I know with Daniel and I working inside of structures in the past, you still have that passion and drive, and you're like, how can I help people see that this is important? And sometimes it's just slow to be adopted, but now it seems like we're at a really interesting time in the industry where there is a lot more consideration going into how we look at things. Data is showing us there's room for improvement, and it's really, it works out how it's supposed to, right?
Yeah, and if I go back to my comment regarding what I was doing in the 2008 time period, I think you both understand the context of that. In the post 9/11 military, what was happening under the leadership of General Shinseki. We were effectively modularizing, modernizing our troop structures, our organizational theory and design of the unit structure. Okay. And so what that meant was instead of deploying as these massive divisions into combat zones, we were deploying. I deployed as an individual company when I went in, for 15 months. And it dawned on me, it really hit me hard when we were landing in Kuwait on, that airstrip, that our 170, man company was being led by a 26-year-old captain. And we were literally being dropped in, and we were going to need to be agile, be quick on our feet, integrate into a massive system, and move about effectively through the terrain that was in front of us. And I bring that up because I'm going to liken that to what's happening right now in corporate America. I mean, we've all been reading the headlines on how many people have been laid off and what is restructuring in the labor force. And I likened what we're doing right now, you guys in your outfit, me and mine. We're becoming those small units, that are deployable to really address problems in a just-in-time manner and be agile to move around the corporate space and the entrepreneurial, space as needed.
I think kind of tying into the architecture of what we're both trying to build here, I think there's more opportunity as AI is unrolled into freeing up creative capacity for the individuals that are driving these roles to not necessarily just use AI to cut jobs, but if AI is implemented properly, ends up being a support model to the person that's behind the role, it gives them a little bit more time and freedom to maybe look down some of these optimization paths that we're looking at with how do they stay in flow and how do they get creative and plugging into these SOP processes and things that we're talking about. How do we, historically we go into that situation and it's just tie a person to a task and hope that outcome is great. Whereas with AI is implemented and we get to a point where it doesn't necessarily eliminate them, it frees up more time for them to focus on what they can be better at, which includes some of this time to go back into themselves and how they interact with their team. So I'm excited about the possibilities. I don't buy into the doom and gloom model that AI is going to take everybody's jobs. I think it can be used as a great accelerator to free up bandwidth for people to have more personal exploration that makes them a better impact driver to the team.
Well, I'll make a comment on that too, Derek. So in design philosophy, a lot of the times what we're doing is working to uncover and to address myths, break them down, shift paradigms around those persistent prevailing myths that are out there. One thing I'm really optimistic about when I look at AI is how it is in fact freeing up that higher level capacity for us to really take a critical look at, okay, so this is my presumption here, but why? Where did that idea come from? Why did that thought get planted in this paradigm, right? I love to tell people about the difference between constraints and limitations. In the military, early on in military decision making, this gets ingrained in us regarding the difference between a decision that's made by a set of circumstances that are chosen versus a decision that gets made based on a set of circumstances that are in fact immutable and immovable. And it does take some humility to understand the difference between those two. But I like that now we're in a place where people that are non-military, war fighting, are in a space where they can actually start thinking like this. It's such an incredible thing to find ourselves, the three of us being veterans, in this capacity to be working with management teams and building out that muscle and that strength in their thought apparatus.
I think one of the things that we talked about last week when we were doing our intro call is on this AI piece, a lot of what you do is that reprogramming, right? And you get people that come in and think, oh man, I got ChatGPT. I'm going to go in and I'm going to use it for anything and everything I possibly can. So solve my problems, right? Well, what happens, and you brought this up last week, is, they get so reliant on it that they forget and stop thinking for themselves, right? And how do you reprogram? I would like to jump into a little bit of that framework, if you don't mind. It was very interesting to Derek and us. I'm sure the audience would love to hear about it. And, just give them the down and dirty on kind of what it is that you do in this process and why it's effective.
So I'm going to take a step back for a moment and tell a little bit of a personal story here. Last year, after more than a decade of journeying with really highly technical minds in oil and energy, I had been working through some of my own personal programming related to this topic, and I found art just started flowing out of me. I have a 6-volume art collection at this point, all illustrations that just sort of flowed out of me. And what was interesting about that is I had my family had never seen me as a creative, artistic person. In fact, the kids used to make fun of me that I could never draw, not even the simplest of things, a dog. No, not possible. No, mom. But here I have this 6-volume collection now. So it's the result of this personal programming that I was working through. And what was that programming doing? It was helping me get into a state of flow. So I have been talking about art a lot with technology. And this is really important because we need technologists understanding the creative process to get into a flow that artists use. We need artists understanding the habits and the methods that really structured analytical minds use to get into their state of flow. Because at the end of the day, they're both actually trying to achieve that same state. They may be using different tactics, different frameworks to get there, but they're still aiming for that same optimal state of their cognition, which will then allow them to be able to put real solutions to the paper or on the table. Okay. Now, this is where I draw the line of delineation between AI, because can I train an AI agent to be a product manager? Yes, I can. And will that agent prompt the teams through the frameworks and design that I've been trained on? It can. But can that agent work with those individuals, bring them together as a team, and help them collectively achieve a state of flow together? No, it will not. That is the human part of this work. That's the human capacity that cannot be augmented. And that's what I really focus on when I'm talking about art and technology together, is that realization, that fact right there. And so in regards to how we get a team to do that, I mean, just think about it. You get a room of 30 people together. It's going to be really difficult to get them to agree on almost anything. So how do you get those same 30 people working together in this state of flow? It becomes even more challenging. Well, that's why you need proven, demonstrated tactics and techniques that enact neuroplasticity in the brain. The plasticity of the mind is how we work from the conceptual side of our thinking to the concrete side of our thinking, from the creative side to the analytical side. And no, in fact, it is not true that you are either or and you cannot be both. The fact is that we are, in fact, both, and we can, in fact, decompartmentalize and allow those that state of flow to allow those different, touch points, if you want to think about it this way, cognitively, to then be able to work together in agreement.
Yeah, I was just watching a short clip last night actually, and it kind of relates to what you're saying. And this guy, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he's the CEO of the company that builds video game Grand Theft Auto. And he was talking about how exactly what you said, all of these LLMs and these big data sets are backwards looking technology. So is the capability there to build these things and replicate these things based on backwards looking data? Sure. The best we can do with those systems is make a clone of what already exists. But when it comes to the real creativity of driving innovation and driving forward, it's not going to be through AI. And that ties in directly with what you're talking about, that he was so confident that they had nothing to worry about because, sure, anybody could latch on to technology and clone something that already exists. But how are you going to clone human creativity? It's just not going to happen, right? So that I literally just watched that clip last night, and I was like, that's a really good explanation of how to look at this strategy and moving forward. And we found in our own lives that a lot of things that we're doing in our business, we have to implement different things to get to that place to help us be able to perform better. And those mechanisms are many different things, right? It could be gym time that leads to a better mental capacity to be able to write articles. A lot of times we check out, Daniel plays the handpan and loves music. That's his thing. He gets in his flow state, and there's so many different ways that we like to look at. So that's why we're really interested to talk with you about your process, because I don't think you can ever have too many tools in your toolkit that can help you kind of get into that frame of mind that leads to a better outcome.
I like that's your attitude. I like that a lot because that demonstrates a growth, mindset, what you just said there. There's not one way. And that's why with Acorders, I also talk about white glove services, right? So if you're working with me as an individual who's seeking programming to help balance out your, cognitive and creative thought processes, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start asking you to do that inventory of your day in the life, journey. What are your habits really looking like in your day in your life? Are you over extended, in that structured workflow, right? Are you spending too many hours, quite frankly, crunching numbers in a spreadsheet when you could be mixing up some of those tasks? My point is this: if you're ever finding yourself doing one specific task longer than 20 minutes, you're probably already hitting a point where you're getting some residual diminishing value and effect out of the performance of your work. So I like to break my work, my timetables and my work down by 30 minutes, right? And ensure that I'm mixing in some variation within that 30-minute period of time. And sometimes that's implementing a 10-minute break every 30 minutes, depending on how deep the work is going. And this always has to be very situational. So again, it always goes back to that white glove, because my solution for my programming that resulted in 6 volumes of art is not going to be the same programming that will get the same results for Daniel or for you, Derek.
That's absolutely true. I mean, one of the things that Derek and I started doing, we're both entrepreneurs. We're both launching this business. It's a lot of work, and the podcast on top of it, trying to provide value to everybody, is another effort. So what we figured out was not only with the podcast, but in other things that we do, stepping outside of this office is 100% a necessity. Some episodes we'll record like this when we got a guest on, where we can have to have the computers and have to be set up like this. But we did an episode that we recorded last week, and it was walking a park, and we just put the mics on. Is it the absolute best quality audio wise? No, but we got outside the box and actually did it walking, and it gave us a chance to be more us, because as soon as you sit down and you start staging things, people start getting nervous, don't know what they're doing. You forget what you're trying to say. And doing that on an everyday basis can help. So what does that mean? Does that mean getting whisper flow on your phone? And when you're doing a brainstorm session, go walk the yard. Do that brainstorm session just talking to the phone, talking to yourself. Instead of sitting at a computer trying to do the brainstorm with AI, and the next thing you know, it's taking you in 6, 7 different directions because you're not leading it properly. Take your original thoughts and then go into that AI side.
Yeah, and I'll bring up a project that I'm working on right now. 0 to 1 is my first ever art project that I'm working with a partner, a collaborator. Ashish Tripathi he's a music producer. He's designed a whole sound track for this first volume of art that I'm bringing out with this exhibit. And so what's going to happen is when people visit the exhibit, they'll get the opportunity to scan a QR code, put their earbuds in, and walk through listening to music while viewing the art at the same time. One of the things that he and I are going to do, we're doing a pop-up show at the end of this month, but beyond doing this pop-up show at the Houston's Ion, the 29th of May, we're also going to be utilizing that same project and some of the technology innovation programming that we're pursuing together. So he and I are actively looking out for hackathons or venture contests where we can be incorporating the ability to view and experience this immersive collection alongside the frameworks for design and problem solving and business model canvassing.
You said this is the 29th at the Ion?
That's right. The 29th of May at the Ion. It'll be between 3 and 6 p.m. in the afternoon. So it's right there in that happy hour time. There's free parking on site, and there's restaurants and bars. So I'm telling people, come out. You'll get a chance to walk through the immersive exhibit and play around with some technology, and then go have a drink with some friends.
The Ion is that's the big complex right in the middle of downtown that's got the rooftop garden and all. Okay, I've been there one time.
It's a historic landmark in Houston. It used to be the Sears building. Rice Alliance purchased the building. They completely redeveloped it to be an innovation center for the ecosystem of Houston. And it sits right next door to Greentown Labs, which is another big innovation ecosystem destination here in Houston. So it's a really great part of town to be in. Lots of art is also around in the area too.
Yeah, my wife and I were traveling through Houston, and I think it was actually an OGGN event that we had come down for, and we wound up going having Korean barbecue and kind of walking around. There was a coffee shop / plant store that almost made me go broke.
Sounds just like Houston. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. No, and then the other thing to touch on there regarding that need for breaking up those let's say process steps, right, and getting that opportunity to break away for a brain break. If we talk about the technology programming, we're usually having to approach each piece of the framework: problem discovery, solution analysis, business model canvassing. Those are the basic prompts for the frameworks that we use in design and technology development. We have to incorporate a formulaic way of stepping into each one of those tasks that both entertains divergent and convergent, construction and deconstruction at the same time. And why is that really important? Because it inherently challenges us to remove bias, prejudice, our own thoughts about a situation. We really question paradigms and get more in critical thinking mode when we're able to remove our ego out of the situation and have that openness and that ability to actually explore those things in both a deconstructive and a constructive way.
Yeah, that's a huge area that has room for improvement in both the human side in general and in oil and gas. I think we can all agree in our experience in oil and gas and in the military as well. If you don't put effort into exploring how to do that, it just makes the process either not likely to succeed or flat out borderline impossible, that it's never going to succeed. Because how much has ego been a factor in personal and professional development, right? And it's not a topic that a lot of people or companies is eagerly just open about doing workaround, right? There's a lot of different ways to look at ego and what is it, what does it mean, and it's not always the status quo to walk into a leadership structure where egos are not involved. Let's just put it that way.
Uh, that's a whole nother matter there. The stakeholder engagement piece is always an interesting dance. But what we find when we're working in these venture teams or technology development teams is we usually have to get a good representative mix of people at the table from cross functions. So we have to have core engineering, technologists, scientists engaged with business, marketing, portfolio management, right? If we're not having that cross functional approach, we're not listening to each other, and we're developing our solutions and our answers based on our own criteria and our own judgment. And so this is where I'll go back to AI again, and another reason why I find some optimism here with what we're doing with AI. It used to be, unless you had a statistically savvy person sitting at the table, it would be rather difficult, in fact, to, without bias, utilize a certain consensus of thought to challenge, let's say, the criteria around a solution or an understanding of a situation, right? And so if that muscle wasn't within the team suffered, and everybody sort of would fall back into, okay, well, there's a reason why prejudice and bias exists. It exists so that I can make these intuitive, judgment calls. It's a very human thing. It's there for a reason, right? But what AI is doing is it's kind of made it to where every team gets to have that statistical mindset at the table with them, because you know that you're going to get that statistically valid perspective based on a certain number instances of data that have been modeled out and tested over time. When you prompt the AI to give you a most likely scenario based on a set of principles and a situation, you can bet that it's a consensus middle of the road view. But then you still have to challenge it. You have to then understand, well, what is the sensitivity around the situation here? And then how can we break this down? Like, how can we completely break this paradigm? And then where's that volatility, right? Where does that show up as risk in a financial model? Where does that show up in terms of business modeling, a real showstopper to commercialization, right? If I can't take all those variables into account when I'm constructing my value proposition, will I be dead on arrival when I go and I meet my customer in their conference room? These are things that are inherently human and not soft at all.
Absolutely. I mean, we talk about artists and we talk about art. Let me ask you this. In your opinion, what are they getting right now that AI is out, right? Things are changing in our industry, they're changing in the corporate world. What's the one thing artists have got figured out on their end?
I don't know that any of us have it really figured out right now, if I'm being honest with you. I think my biggest concern, and this is something I've been exposed to much more as a business owner, no longer having the corporate infrastructure around me. Um, you no longer have a corporate brand with values and principles that you can rest on when you walk in a room. You're cultivating relationships with people that come from sometimes very different mindsets than you, right? But you can't wait on the perfect, relationship to come before you start developing business. So I made this comment in a post yesterday, like getting along is usually good enough to get where we need to be going. I don't need to be holding out for perfect agreement on everything, and I'll get back to what you were talking about regarding what they do get right, what we get right. But before I do, I want to comment on something that I'm concerned that we're getting wrong. And that's that ever since I saw AI being released to the public and implemented as it has, the thought circles I've been moving in, the dialogues I've been observing in the open sphere online, many people almost seem to be salivating at the mouth to be canceling one another out. So artists and creative types talking about how, well, now we don't need engineers. We can just get the numbers crunched through AI. Engineers and scientist types, oh, well, whoever needs to worry about paying for creative work again, now we can just get AI to do it. And that right there, I think that's where we're going to end up on the other side of this, inherently worse off if we continue on that path, right? If we look at it instead and we say to ourselves, wow, there's walls coming down right now. Information cycles and situations are evolving at a pace and a speed that we've never seen before. I can, in fact, enter into this flow. I'm going to use that word again, flow, and I can work closer and get more results and more amplification of outcomes if I'm willing to work with somebody that I may have in the past seen as an adversarial kind of, persona to me. Like if we can actually start challenging so much about what we think of other people's thought processes and work, we will get so much more done in this next decade ahead. So I hope we'll get through this moment in which we're trying to cancel one another out and neutralize each other with technology. And I really hope we'll get to the point where we're being able to leverage it to amplify all of us across the board.
I think something that lands for me on that, just kind of a visual model in my mind of how I thought about a lot of different things as it ties to my background experience. Looking at interacting with people on the independent side that are maybe trying to build their business around their creativity, and looking at the other side of things where it's a lot bigger, bulkier, maybe corporate strategy. Everything is on a spectrum usually, right? And when we operate out of extremes on the spectrum, usually it's not healthy to be on one extreme or the other. And I think about this as like a sine wave and kind of modulating that experience of the waveforms as they're coming across. You could turn it way down too low and slow and starve out on this end of the extreme, or you could crank it up and jam it together and raise it up higher. But it's not going to usually be a healthy signal that doesn't have a lot of noise in it either. So that flow state that you described is, how do we take this signal and modulate it to where it's not too low and slow, it's not too fast and chaotic, but it's just flowing and it's in the right space on the spectrum to where you can take the noise out, still get the job done, and you're not operating out of these chaotic extremes on either end. So I like the way you tied that together. Makes sense to me.
Yeah, and I've been finding that particle physics has been serving as a really interesting and useful allegory for me to have a lot of these conversations. Particles don't have to be in ideological alignment to move in a particle field together. There's laws of physics, and those laws of physics govern over the situation, and they move around within those limitations, right? And I bring that up here mainly because, let's do a thought exercise for a moment here with each other. If you take a piece of paper and you draw a circle and you cut that circle down the middle, okay? We'll call this paradigm 1, okay? Let's say half of that circle represents all the people in the world who are naturally wired by the way that their neurochemistry is set up in their brain to have a faith in God. We're not talking about religion here, we're just saying faith, okay? Take a look at the science of this. We do know there's this very specific part of your brain that if, neuromapped, it will light up when engaged in any kind of topic around faith or inner dialogue, okay? The way that our brain lights up in our inner dialogue is vastly different based on this construct, okay? That's something that happens within the neuro design of our brain, okay? It has nothing to do with specifically religion. This is just faith. So 50% roughly of the human population, scientists think, would fall on that faith spectrum. The other 50%, they just don't have that chemistry, that design within their neuro pathways, okay? Now, that same circle, okay, you draw another division down it halfway. Let's talk about political ideologies for a moment, okay? It's just this natural part of our human, let's say, genome to have this political polarization. And we can say this because we've studied it over centuries of political cycles. And there are moments where volatility and polarization will arise and will get pitted against one another. But in most instances, you have these or these polar opposites, and there's a spectrum in between. But guess what? Those 50-50s, they don't line up. So it's not like one is mutually exclusive to the other. Okay. In fact, it's more like a spinning ball, and you can keep on breaking it. There's other 50%, binary paradigms that exist out there. Growth mindset versus fixed mindset is another one of those 50% binary segmentations, but it ends up being that most people show up on a spectrum, to your point. So we can keep on we can go at this case by case. And what you'll notice over time is that you no longer have a circle with an obvious cut down the middle. You actually have what looks like the hub and spoke for the inner part of a tire. Okay. And my point is that it's not like all of the 50% that were on one side of the paradigm over here are also the same people that are on the 50% of the next layer that you put on in the next paradigm that you're considering. And so this has everything to do with what I was just talking about earlier. We don't have it in us right now. We cannot afford to be waiting on perfect agreement, ideological alignment to get things done. We just can't. The world is demanding too much of us, and the world is demanding too much of the moment that we're in for that to be the case.
Well, and I like what you're talking about with that, because what you are designing with these, what we know highly impacts people's trajectories is programming. And even if you're on one season or level of looking at things now, that doesn't mean that you can't change your neuroplasticity and start to affect the change in the areas that you want to grow in. And a large part of that responsibility is the programming that goes in every day that shapes the outcome. So it's interesting to think about how, when you go to the table to look at these things and how we map those out, if you don't look at your current programming and what needs to change in that programming to get you to the other side of the fence. So it's just a matter, like you said, open versus closed, fixed versus growth. There's a lot of rabbit holes you can go down on what kind of programming you look at that starts to change the way that you perceive things. And there's so much more room for growth, and this neuroplasticity can be expanded and malleable to radically shift the trajectory that you're on, if that's what you're looking for.
I'm really glad you connected those dots for me, because that's really what I'm aiming at with my work. Really, like I break a lot of, let's say, myths down, right? So another one is that, once you get to the state, the age of 40, after that, your brain is no longer going to be open for more growth. You're going to have a closed mindset from 40 onward. That is an inherent, like, that's a very, very antiquated way of looking at human beings. Okay. In fact, neuroscience and behavioral science has shown us that, if you can get the programming piece done right, in fact, you can continue to be someone that has a growth mindset and be naturally intellectually curious all the way until your 60s and beyond, depending on the circumstances that you live in. That programming piece is really important. And so that's the other thing, is I'm most excited about the fact that we're in a moment in time now where we can really say, you know what, these old binary, paradigm setting ways of looking at the world were overly simplistic, they were overly flattened, and they were never inherently showing up with all the complexity and all the richness of humanity. And every one of those instances of those supposed paradigms, those rules, if you will, that I was mentioning, rather than having a really clean-cut binary way of segmenting and organizing humanity, the truth of the matter is that we all show up in a spectrum. None of us individually or collectively are a monolith.
Not just in our industry and in our country, but when you start talking about other cultures, different environments, and your kind of business design and what you've grown to see over the years, how is it different? Right? We get real, it's really easy to look at our bubble, right? But when you start talking and stuff like this, looking at it from another aspect of, are we in the energy sector in the United States doing things differently than somebody in Germany? And what does that look like? And what can we learn from that?
I really like that question. Let me come at this from another paradigm or myth that I like to break. The idea of hemispheric brain dominance. We have this idea that you're either right brain dominant or left brain dominant. You cannot be both. And then from that assignment, we attach all of these, let's say, ideas. Okay. So there's the creative versus the analytic. There's the emotional versus the logical. There's all of these different labels that we like to then pack on top of this hemispheric brain dominance model. But you want to know something? The most advanced research in neuroscience and behavioral science has completely debunked the model entirely. So all those ideas that we then tack on top of the model, if the model is completely bogus and is not even real, where do they sit? And yet, in most of the Western world, we're continuing to organize our early years of education around this model. We're continuing to see it completely baked into how we organize our labor force, how corporations, hire, and how they decide who gets promoted and who doesn't get promoted has a lot to do with this myth. Now, I've had the benefit in my career journey starting internationally in Germany, and I've moved all over the globe working with teams and technology development that had multiple backgrounds with culture, language, nationality, all coming together on one team. And at one point in time in my career, I took note of this paradigm on the right brain, left brain model, and realized that it wasn't entirely baked into every other culture. In fact, going into Asia, Middle East, Africa, they didn't have that organizational strategy at all baked into anything regarding, maybe it was influencing their education if their education happened to be, very much westernized. But in terms of culture, in terms of, the ways of working within teams, they did not. And what I will tell you is that brought a different kind of team together. That brought a different kind of thinking together. What I noticed is that people were not as attached to their ideas. They knew that ideas are like oxygen. We all have to breathe in oxygen. We all breathe out carbon. Like, that's the way ideas are. Okay. And so there was this realization that you just needed to test those ideas. You just had to get them out, rapidly test, and then validate and move in a consensus And consensus didn't have to be one specific idea that everybody was moving on. Consensus could be a grouping of different thoughts within a theme, and we could then kind of directionally be moving in that, optimal, strategy, right? But there was so much more capacity to be working through our frameworks. And so this is where I'm going to talk about energy, the organization of the energy sector for a moment. Okay, so traditionally we've worked in these highly segmented sectors of upstream, midstream, downstream. Okay, but now when we talk about new technology coming on, where is that new energy, renewable energy coming on and being implemented? Suddenly these very core activities that have been regulated, codes have been written around, laws have been written around, HSC practices have been written around, all these insurance, financialization, architecture of cap tables, all of these things have always been structured within these very segmented organizational strategies. But my point is that the world that we're living in now is so highly integrated. So with data centers, I'll use that as a use case here as an example. Most data centers that are going up here in the US right now have to have their own behind the meter form of energy production and storage, because they simply can't not get the energy requirements they need from offtake agreements with the grid. And so now we're looking at producing energy in spaces where we've never produced it before, storing it in ways that we've never stored it before, utilizing it in ways that we've never utilized it before. And all of the assumptions are having to be questioned here. All of the preset programming is needing to be redesigned around these new situations that we're moving forward into.
Absolutely. Guys, I hate to do it, but we're running right up on an hour right now. So, Kelly, one thing we like to do at the end of the show is a little rapid fire question. I'm gonna give you 5 questions, as fast as you can. Let's see what your answers are here. Houston, in one word.
Innovation kitchen.
Innovation kitchen. I like it. I like it. Last thing you learned that changed how you work.
Flow state. It's important in every sector, in every part of the economy.
Studio, conference room, or job site?
Studio all day long, getting my hands on the actual task and working with the client, going through the frameworks.
It's that artist side of you too. Best advice you ignored, and you were right to ignore it.
That in order to get where I wanted to go, I needed to backwards engineer a specific job title to where I was at that moment in time.
Next risk you're going to take?
Strategic partnerships within Acorders are necessary for the brand to be able to be fully implemented both in the art and the technology space. So I'm right now actively seeking the strategies that are necessary to put those partnerships in place.
That's great. Well, we appreciate you coming on the show. This has been beyond informative. I know I've learned quite a bit, and just like we said last week, we'd love to keep these conversations going with you. If we can ever be of assistance, don't hesitate to reach out. And how can the audience find you?
LinkedIn is the best place to find me. So my name, Kailey Euceda, and the company Acorders.
I think we just add that we really appreciate what you're doing and where you're going with this workflow and this process design that you're looking at. It's important for us to bring back in the humanity side of things in the mix of all these technology, focused, driven environments. So we have a huge passion right there with you to doing that through our work, and there's going to be many more opportunities for us to collaborate on how to bring this to people and help them look at this side of things and condition that muscle with the programming like we talked about. So it's always exciting to meet kindred spirits and get in alignment with people who have the same goals and dreams with their life's work. So we're super pumped about the connection and how it unfolded, and we're really looking forward to working with you more.
No, I feel the same. I have to comment back to that when it comes to veterans, you guys are working in your capacity with leadership consulting. You guys are breaking paradigms as well. You're spotlighting something that I want to highlight here before we go, and that's that veterans, that military mindsets are all robotic and not human. That's just so far from the truth. And the fact that the culture of our and the let's say the programming again that went into our leadership style is not robotic, and you guys are bringing that into spaces and being able to prove that value proposition around our human way of working together. That's amazing that y'all are being able to focus on that.
Appreciate you being here with us on the One Shot Growth Podcast. If this episode hit for you, subscribe, share it with someone who needs it, and keep the conversation going. And if you want to see what we're building, head over to oneshotgrowth.com. We're just getting started. See you on the next one.